Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, or rather good morning. Good afternoon from the Emirates. Thank you, Joanna, for that interesting presentation. I was just thinking when you were talking about Morgan O'Hara, I remember meeting her about 10 years ago at a drawing conference in New York. I remember she told me that I had too much writing on my slides. That was my memory of meeting Morgan O'Hara. So I took that piece of advice to heart. I'm going to talk a little bit about my students' work today. I seem to have moved forward a slide here. This project is called Speculative Sketching. So it's also continuing with Joanna's theme a little bit, with linking philosophy and drawing. And it's talking about a specific kind of philosophy and a specific kind of drawing. So I mean, I'm somebody that, excuse me, just tipped over my water. I work with drawing research for quite some time, and within the context of drawing research, you come across the idea of thinking through drawing. It's quite a popular refrain, and it has lots of ways in which it can be interpreted. It implies quite a number of things. I suppose chief among them would be that drawing and thinking, that they're linked in some vital way. And I mean, while this seems quite an obvious sort of thing to say, it's worth kind of pausing and thinking a bit about what that connection is, and how it's understood. So I mean, that's sort of kind of the question that I ask myself really with my research. I'm thinking, what does it mean to say that drawing and thinking are linked? I mean, does it mean that drawing equals thinking? And if that's the case, doesn't that mean that thinking is equivalent to drawing in some way? So, you know, it's a popular refrain. You hear it in lots of places, and it underpins some of the understanding of what drawing research is. So, yeah, I explore it in my own practice.
Joe,
but I'm
sorry,
also currently
Joe, sorry to interrupt you a sec. Are you scrolling through your slides?
I am.
Yeah, because
it's moving.
Because we're sharing. This is your screen here, but for some reason it's not moving.
Okay, is this working now?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're back. Okay.
Yeah, well done. Okay, great.
I'll try and keep to time. And where was I? I was on slide number 4, I think I was. Can you see this one now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some colored drawings in the top right-hand corner. Okay. So I mean, I'm currently teaching undergraduate students drawing, and I'm teaching first-year design students. So I look at this idea in my own practice. I publish papers, I write books and things, but I decided to have a look at thinking through drawing by effectively trying to teach thinking through the teaching of drawing. And for a variety of reasons, to do, you know, pedagogical reasons, research reasons, I kind of kept it quite simple. Thinking in this instance equals philosophy, and drawing can equal process. So that's a way in which you might pursue an idea like this. So can we now move on it and move to the next slide? Yeah. So the drawing project I'm referring to, it's quite specific. It combines the contemporary metaphysics articulated by American philosopher Graham Harman with an analytical, serial developed process of observational drawing. So I'm calling this speculative sketching. The philosophy that I'm using is kind of highly speculative in many ways, and the way in which they're drawing has a kind of sketch-like quality to it, which I will talk a little bit about, pencil drawing mostly. So a little kind of process of Harman's philosophical program for those who aren't familiar with it. It's fairly new. It's called Object-Oriented Ontology, pronounced triple O. It prioritizes objects as the basis of all that exists. So for Harman, the object is synonymous with thing or entity. If it exists, it's an object, and so all objects are equal in this philosophy. It makes triple O a flat ontology, has sort of similarities with the work of Latour and people like that. Within this flat ontology, objects are said to remain mutually autonomous and withdrawn. It's quite an interesting philosophy, and it's positing we don't really have access to things in a direct way. We never encounter objects directly. What we encounter is something that Harman's calling a sensual object. So it's a distortion or a caricature of this underlying entity perceived within the phenomenal realm. I should say that I kind of found my way towards this because I've been working with phenomenology for a little while, and as part of my doctorate, I kind of worked with it. So I was quite interested in the work of Husserl. And triple O is interesting as a metaphysic because it's underpinned by intentionality, which is Husserl's sort of big idea. It was one of the most interesting and important things that Husserlian phenomenology came up with. And that keeps the focus on seeing, which is very useful for drawing. Drawing possibly equates to seeing in some other. It's another assumption which is often passed around, and which is true in many ways. So the real object that Harman is positing as ontologically hidden and withdrawn is said to have real qualities. So these are intrinsic attributes that the object needs to make it an individual thing. Likewise, the thing that you're encountering, this sensual object that you encounter, is supposed to have sensual qualities. So these are akin to like surface qualities, and they change in and over time. So that's a kind of summary of the philosophy. It's phenomenology meets metaphysics, and it's got flaws, it's got faults, but it's got lots of interesting areas for people to work with and kind of use as a tool. So in terms of what I'm doing with this, it's what I pursue is an analytical form of observational contour drawing. So these students, they are first thinking, but also philosophy at this level, or drawing. There's kind of so many. The learning curve is extremely steep and wonderful. Basically, what I'm doing with this is I'm kind of alerting them through a process of drawing that objects. I'm alerting them to the idea that objects might be somewhat deeper than they initially appear. So for practical purposes, these students, they're focusing on drawing observable things. The metaphysics of triple O doesn't care about observable things. It can be immaterial things that can't be seen, but students need to draw. These students need to draw things that they can see, and so purely imaginary objects, that's another project. Delivered elsewhere. The project begins by introducing to students the idea that things possess intrinsic qualities that cannot be directly observed, but which a process of drawing might help detect. And this idea is inspired by Harman's real qualities. Students, they certainly don't need a process of triple O in order for this idea to make sense. Part of my job as a tutor is explaining things in a kind of understandable way. So there are many ways to describe the idea of essence, of persistence, of invariance to students. Part of what you teach is you teach an interest in the subject, so they definitely can get on board with some of these ideas. Interestingly, when I'm teaching this to students who draw, the idea of locating kind of hidden things or things which are not directly observable, it appeals to students who like to draw in pencil and who like to leave things unfinished. This is where the kind of sketch is coming from. They're often the same students who accept without too much difficulty the idea that as a mode of representation, drawing is working by remaining incomplete in some way. It's partial. Its power comes from its ability to inquire into things and also leave questions open because it has an openness to it as a structure. Just to be sort of really clear, if there's any kind of Harman adherents in the audience, Harman would totally disagree that these qualities could be found in this way. So much less via a method of drawing. So to locate them would immediately turn them into something he's calling sensual qualities. On the other hand, Edmund Husserl, he thought that such qualities could definitely be found. He had a wonderful method for discovering them, for hunting them. through variations, through a series effectively. And he called this eidetic variation. Harman is not on board with that claim. It's far too difficult to defend for him. But this brings us back to drawing. So this, for me, this is the interesting thing from a drawing perspective. This difficulty is precisely what is interesting. In arguing that objects, all objects, everything must possess these intrinsic qualities, these essential, these invariant, whatever you want to call them, Harman is completely unable to provide any examples of this. He never does in any of his books, because if he does, he falls into this trap of them basically transforming themselves into this other kind of quality that he's talking about. Husserl was super rigorous, had these methods for looking for them, but Harman has sort of disavowed all that. So we don't know what they look like. We've kind of no idea how you might understand these sorts of things. So they remain a question. And that brings drawing back in, it kind of brings it roaring back in, because once you've got a question like that, and you've got a visual practice like drawing, you can start to look for them. You can start to think about what this idea might look like. So in summary, while these students, they're drawing the sensual object, the thing they can see, which has sensual qualities, it's these elusive real qualities that they're trying to find. I've got no idea of time, but I'm just going to proceed on towards method. So what does this look like in practice? I mean, these examples you've been seeing on the screen, they're examples of the student work produced through this. It's a series that they produce, and it involves roughly involves two stages. It should be kind of emphasized that as a series, this is a working drawing. This thing can get bigger and bigger depending on how interested the students are. It has a space to it, a kind of cognitive space and a physical space. The first stage, they're required to produce a series of observational drawings, plant drawings in this instance. They're drawing plants. They need to produce a minimum of 4. We've stuck with 4 in this project, 4 different pencil drawings on A3 paper of exactly the same plant. So this is about sameness and difference coming together in the same project. To help achieve difference, students are drawing the plant from 4 different angles. They're also drawing each plant inside an axonometric box you can see here on there to help maintain position. So I work with, teach them about regulating lines. We've got a lot of architecture where I work, and so we can kind of pinch ideas from architects about how to teach drawing. So you get sort of series of drawings like this, where we've got the same plant and the students moved around it, and they're observing, the plant from different angles, and they're producing a contour drawing of it. The criteria is a contour drawing, a line contour drawing, no tone, no color yet, and just to observe, just to draw what they can see, basically. So in producing some quite lovely drawings actually through this process, they play around with line quality. They follow the shape of the leaves. If the professor has forgotten to water the plants, then some leaves drop off. With all of this is reinforcing this understanding of sensual qualities are changing, while the sensual object doesn't change. It's the same plant. It loses a few leaves, but it's the same plant. And so the drawing, the students, they have their own, they kind of approach this in their own way, but they are limited by the method. And they have to produce this series, which some of them like, some of them don't like. 4 is a kind of minimum number. It still causes the odd complaint. So what happens then is we move on to an analysis stage. So I'm asking them to do an analysis of their drawings. The plant gets put to one side, gets removed. They're looking in their drawings to try to see what they can do in terms of thinking. Each analysis is happening on a single sheet of paper. And it's a method of tracing and transferring shapes from the series to this individual sheet. And they can do more of these analysis drawings as they proceed. Students are first asked to locate and trace 4 similar types of thing, one from each of their 4 drawings. And they use colors to link traced areas back to the series. And we can see here, this is what an analysis sheet is looking like. So they trace forms. In this case, they've traced some leaves, and they've this student, we've got 1 leaf from each of the 4 drawings are arranged on the top, and then they're overlaid below it. This is a kind of method of analysis where they're looking for persistence, really. They're looking for forms to emerge. So they're looking, I mean, the way I explain it to them in terms of them understanding is a new version. The minute I say make a new version, they get it. And okay, we'll do a new version. If I explain it in terms of persistence and things, they can look at me a bit blankly for a moment. And this is one of the ideas about how you might teach thinking through drawing. What does persistence look like? What does invariance look like? When they found a shape, they just isolate it through a bit more shading, and then they transfer it to the bottom, and then we get a kind of form appears at the bottom. It's a process of distillation. So you can kind of understand from the word essence, for example, you can understand distillation. Interestingly, these things are extracted in an oblique fashion. So they're drawn, these forms are drawn from observation, but they're not drawn directly from the plant. There's a kind of few steps removed here. And this offers a number of things. So students usually produce their first analysis sheet by picking a single leaf as the thing they trace. So they've got 4 drawings of the same plant, and they start with the leaf. This is because the leaf is a nameable thing, and it's also easy to find in each drawing. The reason for changing direction is they don't have exactly the same drawings. They can't find the same leaf in each drawing. Okay, that's one of the reasons for producing a series and for moving around the object. They're forced to entertain an idea of difference. Some students, some of the ones who are interested, they kind of progress to try to locate more complex areas, 2 leaves together maybe, or 2 leaves plus stem. And I talk with them about this. I say, well, I don't have answers for where the kind of upper end of this is. And this always, they're looking for answers from me. But I say, no, this is a genuine question. Like what are the things that you might isolate from this, and how do they persist? Sometimes the things can't be named as such. 2 leaves plus stem, it's sort of a kind of compound name. In kind of creating these drawings as these new drawings as a kind of overlaid gathering, it is a way to think about the way that Harman understands object, and also Heidegger's Das Ding. It's a gathering. The thing is an extraordinary understanding when you try and dig down into it. So we talk a little bit about that with some of them who are interested. What constitutes a thing, and how might it be found and extracted from these drawings? So we get different kinds of outputs from this process. One of my students here, Ferial, you can see this is an early attempt of hers on the left. And she is producing, she's isolated 4 leaves, and then she overlays them, thinks about the composition, and she's finding a shape within there. The shape, as I emphasize them, is artificial in a sense. The leaf that they find never existed on the plant. It's something persistent which is emerging from those forms. When they try and make it more complex, we get something they isolate 2 leaves. They can find 2 leaves in each drawing, and then they can also overlay them, and this shape can emerge. And so we're just playing with this idea of what might these persistent qualities look like. The plant can lose leaves. When it grows a new leaf, it's not going to look like an oak tree. It's going to look like one of the existing leaves. There are qualities that this plant has which persist. Some of them, trying slightly more complex things here. But this gets a bit interesting. You've got kind of 1 leaf on the left there, which is curled over. So she's overlaying the forms, and she's looking for that. And she says, I call it leaf with a curl. Okay. And then the second drawing, she's isolated, 2 leaves together, and they also form a kind of similar, they follow a similar shape. And the overlaying is a gathering. This plant, over time, the plant has moved around, but she's able to gather forms from it. And then these forms are isolated down the bottom. Just a single form is all that emerges on these sheets. On the third one there, she's got more complex again. It reaches a kind of upper limit, this process. What students find is that if they make it too complex, the thing, whatever it is that they're looking for, they can't find it in each of 4 drawings, meaning that when they've moved around the drawings that they've made might not show something that's too complex. It will always show individual leaves, but maybe 2 leaves plus stem. They can't see that in drawing number 4. And I explained to them, well, there we've hit a slight threshold for this space that you're drawing in, this kind of cognitive space. And I should add that these drawings, they're done with carbon paper. So they transfer from the pencil drawings, they use carbon paper, and they sell carbon paper in the Emirates as a handwriting tool. It's quite interesting. It's not used for drawing. So they're all fascinated that they can use carbon paper. And here we have an example of what's happening with the series as it's kind of building. So you can see one of these students here, Shama, she started to build, you know, she's coloring in the leaves on the analysis sheet so you can see where they came from in the original drawings. I think the left drawing here, the blue is, you know, you can see where the blue is coming from on the drawing on the left, and then there's a red leaf, and green and yellow. And then we can also see here the slightly more complex thing. We're not sure what it is. She's got two leaves plus bit. She's kind of also isolating them. So I explained to them again, there's a kind of, if this is a working drawing, there's a space where this drawing might meet its limit. And that's when, if you're using the coloring method, the original drawings will just be colored in. This process of extracting and tracing, if you're coloring in as a kind of code, sooner or later, you've got multicolored plants and no more extraction to do. So there's spaces within spaces for how big this kind of working drawing could be. And so, you know, I mean, this is what we're kind of exploring. Just as each plant belongs to a type, it remains individual as a thing. So that each plant is persisting, and then we've got real question mark in, you know, qualities. Definitely persisting qualities that belong to it despite changes in appearance. By drawing things in series, students can look for persistence. Whether they can glimpse hidden aspects of reality, that's another question entirely, but it doesn't matter regardless. The attempt to do so, the attempt to look for such a thing, it constitutes an example of thinking through drawing. No clear answer need be given as to whether Harman's real qualities exist, but the thought that they might is shown in being drawn. Thank you very much.